All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar focusing on planning for the post-COVID era. Before we get started, I just wanted to draw your attention to the participant controls to be found at the bottom of your viewing screen. The Q&A button may be used to post a specific question. During the second portion of this webinar, the Q&A phase, questions will be presented and our presenter will do his best to answer them in real time. No pressure. If your question is not answered, an answer will be provided in a follow-up email to you. There's also a chat button. Here you may post observations or comments that will be captured and, time permitting, also be responded to during the course of this webinar. Everyone is on mute and there are no video feeds from participants. However, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the Ally Emergency Management LinkedIn site and YouTube channel in the days to come. You will receive an email with the link to these portals. The webinar has been divided into two phases. Phase 1 is the presentation. Phase 2 is the Q&A portion. Each will last approximately 30 minutes. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's webinar presenter, Cam Kowalski. Cam spent over 3 decades serving in municipal and federal policing roles throughout the country. During his career, he led some of the largest and most complex security operations in Canadian history, including his role as lead aviation security planner for both the 2010 Olympics as well as the G8, G20 summits. He served as the airspace security commander for the multi-agency, multinational effort responsible for the execution of both aviation plans. Cam received multiple awards for his leadership of these operations, which included a personal letter of thanks from President Barack Obama. Following his retirement from the RCMP in 2018, Cam led the safety and security operations for the Great Canadian Rail Tour Company Limited, also known as Rocky Mountaineer, which included strategic oversight of all safety, security, and emergency management initiatives for the largest private rail company in the world. Cam has extensive experience in emergency management, as well as incident command, and is a sessional instructor for the Justice Institute of British Columbia. He instructs organizations in the areas of incident command and emergency operations management. In 2018, Cam received his master's degree in leadership from Royal Roads University and has published his research in the Journal of Business Continuity and Emergency Management. In his spare time, Cam sits on the board of directors of Emergency Preparedness for Industry and Commerce Committee, EPIC, as well as the Awards Committee for the International Association of Women in Policing. So, thank you very much, Cam, and over to you.
Great, thank you, John. As you can see, if you're looking at the panelist and attendees screens, I'm up there twice, and that's only because planning for redundancy is a good method of planning. And one of my comms links didn't work 15 minutes before this was supposed to start. So I'm hoping that it's going to stay here and you will be able to hear me and see me throughout the next half hour for the presentation, and then Q&A 30 minutes after that. So again, thank you everyone for attending. This is our second time we've done the webinar. We did one yesterday for a bunch of people, and I'm going to go through the same information that I presented yesterday. Couple of caveats before we get going. If this were a live instruction, then I would be able to gauge the audience experience by raising hands and looking and poking into everyone's background. So I've made some assumptions in this presentation in that I'm assuming that everyone has had some sort of incident command training or emergency operations center training or experience. So I'm gonna utilize that and be under the belief that you've had some either a little bit of training or a whole lot of training. So there will be some review. So I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page when we walk through this, and then we'll get into some more in-depth things related to future and forward planning, which is the topic of the day. So again, there's lots of time for Q&A afterwards. So Dave, next slide, please. So the way that I've broken it down is I'm going to do some background and introduction, again, looking at some principles of emergency management, and then planning responsibilities that is taken right out of the textbooks in which we utilize for the Justice Institute. It'll talk about what the planning chief is responsible for, what the planning section is responsible for. I'll dig down into a little bit more detail in some of the key areas about post-COVID planning and what you should be looking at and what you should probably be thinking about. After that, I'm going to talk about a systems thinking approach to post-COVID environment. I'll explain more when I get to that. And then look at some of the operational postures and some of the courses of actions that you should be thinking about, you should have in your planning right now. But if you don't, it's not too late. That's okay wherever you're at with your planning. It's never too late to start. So I'll finish off by talking about lessons learned, which again, that was a popular topic yesterday, and I'm sure we'll get to dig around a little bit in that. And then finally, we'll end up with the question and answer. Dave, next slide. So for those of you who've seen me present before or heard me present, I always like to start basically with someone's wisdom that has said something that is particularly profound given the situation, whatever that may be, whatever the exercise may be. For this particular event, which is COVID-19, I took something from Sun Tzu, which was written in the 12th century, but I think it's applicable now. Again, it's talking about the doctrine of war, and for all intents and purposes, what we're facing right now, which is unprecedented, is an unknown enemy. It's an unknown battlefield. You don't know where it's going to come, but it is going to attack. And so what we want to do, what we want to ensure is that you keep yourself invincible, whether that be in isolation as a one-person system or whether it's your organization. You want to make yourself invincible to the threat, to the adversary, and make sure that you've got systems in place that are going to make you effective coming out of the other end of the post-COVID era, which will come eventually. And again, I think this is quite appropriate. It's from The Art of War, which is one of my favorite go-to guides for any wisdom that I seek for any particular battle that we're facing. Dave, next slide. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm talking about emergency management or incident command is I like to go back to the basics and the fundamentals. And emergency management is a continuum. It's based on the philosophies of respond, recover, mitigate, and prepare. Now, in any situation, we can have a plan. We can respond to a plan. We can have mitigation and preparation for the plan, but we can only plan for the knowns. The unknowns are what we want to make sure that we have in our back pocket to go into the mitigation and preparation stages. So right now, we're kind of in a respond and recovery mode. We're looking at mitigation strategies, and we're preparing for the next realm of COVID-19, whatever that may look like. But the reason it's a continuum is that we could be in the mitigation and preparation phase, and then we get hit with a second phase of COVID-19, and we have to go basically back to the start point, which is respond. So again, you can be at any position in this cycle, but you could be knocked back to the start, and then you have to redo what you're currently doing, utilizing what you've already done, what you've already practiced, what you've already trained for, and then build it back into this model. So if you don't use this, I encourage you that you grab this model and use it within your organization, because it's really effective. Next slide, please. For those of you who have taken Incident Command and EOC Essentials, you'll know this model very well. We teach this right from ICS 100 right up to 300 and 400, and of course in EOC Essentials. This is the structure of an EOC, from the director right down to the chiefs. Now, you may in your organization have all these positions staffed right now, dependent on the way that your organization has handled this. Dependent on how many people are left, whether you've got a full contingent of positions and people that can support this. Each agency and each organization is going to be different, because there's been mass layoffs in some sectors. You're probably on reduced hours, so you may not have the bandwidth to be able to support all these roles, but in an optimum situation, this is the people that you would have. Now, for the purposes of today, again, we are going to be focusing on the blue square, which is the planning section chief. or the planning section, depending on how many people you have applied to this, and be talking about what it is that they do, what they should be doing, and what you should be thinking about. Next slide. So again, right from the textbook, this should not be a surprise to anyone who's done any studies in this. These are all the responsibilities for the planning chief. And again, that said, it could be a planning section, but you can see there's 8 bullets. There's you're processing, you're evaluating, you're gathering reports, you're gathering information, you're maintaining the documentation, you're talking about the long-term planning, you're looking at demobilization, you're facilitating recovery, etc. Just those pieces alone is a lot of information and a lot of work for one person to do. And that's why, if at all possible, you should be posturing your organization to have at least 2, if not 3 or 4 people looking at these things, because this is going to save you coming out the other end of COVID-19. If you've done a good job collecting all this information and all this data, it's just going to make you more resilient as an organization and better when you're finished planning and executing and we're back to business as usual. Now, for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to focus on the 3 highlighted bullets and talk about those a little bit more, because they're the ones that really don't get a lot of fanfare when we're talking about an EOC situation. Dave, next slide. So this is where we really get into the context of forward and future planning. Again, advanced planning, that is what we're talking about in the webinar. This is what we should be doing. You should be having plans to address potential issues that are likely to occur. Again, it's beyond the next operational period. And the next operational period, that could be, for a future planning perspective, could be 12 months, 9 months, 6 months, 3 months down the road. But somebody should be looking at that far out and that far advanced. So it's important that you put some horsepower behind this. The next point is demobilization. I could tell you a lot of examples from previous experience, from previous organizations, that this is one that is not done very well. We're really good at sending people out, or in this case, we're sending people home. We're sending them home with computers, equipment, all of these other good things. But then once we're back to normal operations, it's like putting the genie back into the bottle. You need to ensure that you get everybody back. And with them, that they need to bring their equipment, everything that went out in the first phase, and get it back when you're all said and done and everything's ready to go back to normal operations. Extremely important, but again, it's not something that is really done particularly well in many instances. And of course, recovery. Again, what is your recovery direction? Where is it going to go? What does the organization look like? The personnel and the stakeholders, which kind of brings us to the next slide, Dave, if you will, is systems thinking. So systems thinking, I like to refer to as like the bouncing ball analogy. When you drop a rubber ball to the ground, it's going to roll in a certain direction. And the more you do that, the more directions that it's going to take in the different contexts that it's going to go in. So what you need to do is you need to think about, all right, where are all those potential outcomes when we do X? So Peter Senge, who wrote The 5th Discipline, which is one of the great resources that we have in systems thinking approaches, it talks about the integration of action and reflection. And this will allow you to make better decisions. This will allow you to be more robust as an organization when you think through, okay, what if I do this? What is the end point going to be at the end of the day, and who's it going to affect? And that's extremely important when you're talking about getting back to work, getting back to business as usual. Next slide, please. So let's dig down a little bit more into the systems thinking organization. Again, resilience is extremely important, whether that be from an organization standpoint or from an individual standpoint when we're talking about mental health or other factors related to post-COVID era. Again, there needs to be a commitment to the new normal that is established by your EOC team. It's important to have that structure. It's important to have those processes that you probably practiced through tabletops or full-scale exercises or some other manner. But again, this is going to save you at the back end if you practice this well and you continue this throughout the COVID era. Understanding the impact to all tiers, again, it's critical. It's about following that bouncing ball and seeing where it goes and making sure that you reach out and you touch those points that's where the ball is rolled to, and ensure that everybody's on the same page. What I've seen is, and what I've talked to many people, is that there is some pop-ups that are occurring within organizations where some people are doing one thing and some people are doing something else, but there's not the communication link that joins those two together. So it's incredibly important that you make sure that you maintain that continuity and that there is a structured approach and direction. The reason I have supply chain management highlighted is because it's immense. There's so many what ifs related to other people that are beyond our control that are dealing with the same things that we're dealing with and are going to come back in various different waves. We could spend 4 hours just on supply chain management alone. So I'm not really going to touch it, but you need to think about it. You need to probably have your logistics team looking at that and ensure that somebody's got their eye on that particular ball. Next slide. So COAs. Oh, Dave, you jumped ahead too quick. Nope, I'm sorry. My bad. There we go. Thank you. So I like to look at it from a tiered approach to reintegration. Something that is what we preach in EOC Essentials is scalability. Again, you need to make sure that you don't conduct what's known as an all-in process. That as soon as the switch is flipped, everybody goes back to the new sense of normal. Probably not well thought out. You've probably taken time to put together your business continuity plan and do business impact analysis. So what you essentially have to do now is you've got to reverse engineer that and think, okay, we did a good job at going to our redundant locations and sending people home, but now how do we put that back? Because really the crux of a business continuity plan is to get people out and to go somewhere else to conduct business and continue it going. It doesn't really focus or talk about how you get that back to normal. So it's important that you start thinking about that now and look at a first out, last in approach. Again, if you sent the first people out of your organization out, there's a reason that you did that, because they were critical to your business operations. So the last thing that you want to do is bring them back first. Let's do it in a scalable manner, bring people back in waves, and then understand, okay, is there going to be a pop-up in the fall or the winter or some other time, and then ensure that we haven't exposed our critical staff to a new pop-up where we're going to lose them now altogether. So again, we used to, in my policing experience, we had a theory that it was for the critical team members, it was first in, last out. But again, you've got to reverse that now in this current environment with COVID. You need to understand the unknown. Again, there's no bad idea right now in this current atmosphere. So everything's in play. And then predict the future state by planning within the continuum. Again, that's going back to the third slide. Where are you on that? Are you responding, recovering? Are you mitigating or preparing? Again, always be maximum flexible to go back to the start and start replanning based on new valid information. Next slide, please. COAs. So courses of action are something that we utilize quite a lot, but not all organizations do. They look at it, okay, well, we're back to work, we can start business again, but the reality is, unless you're a mom and pop shop that has a sandwich operation that has 5 seats and 2 employees, the status quo is probably not your option. Again, I don't think anyone's going to be able to go back to status quo. So bearing that in mind, you should have at least 3 COAs to say, okay, what's our three possibilities of how we're going to win this battle? Again, when we discussed it as an ally team, and there's some military folks that have got some background on this, it's do we left flank, do we right flank, or do we go up the middle? That's a good way of looking at it. That's a good way of approaching it. So again, if the status quo is not going to work for you, then what's our other options? And we need to ensure that we are able to be flexible and change those as new data becomes available. It might be a heightened vigilance approach. Again, are you going to need masks? Are you going to have to do temperatures? Are you going to do whatever mitigation strategy that your organization decides to do? Or are you going to have a soft roll approach in that, you know, we're going to bring back people in small waves, figure out what's happening, base it on evidence, and then move forward. But just don't rely on, all right, here's our new operating model, here's what we're going to do, get everybody behind that, and don't have a backup plan and then a further backup plan to that. So those are COAs. You should think about those. It's really good strategy. It's worked for the military for centuries, so there's no reason it can't work in your organization. Next slide, please. Lessons learned. We had some great discussions following yesterday's webinar. Lessons learned are critical, but from my experience and the experience of my colleagues, they're not very well done. We talk about them, we think about them, we may have strategies on what to do about them, but at this stage, there's no magic bullet that will give you the best template for a lessons learned model. I know people have looked at it for decades, and there's still no one great solution that I've ever seen. But right now, you should have a formalized document management system that you should be utilizing for lessons learned. Who's writing this stuff down as you go along and saying, oh, that's not really working too well, we should do X. Where is that being stored? Is there common themes that are being identified on your roadmap to success? You know, what is going to be the new norm for the post-COVID world that we're going to be living in? Again, we get better based on what we've done and where we've failed in the past. But if you don't write that down, then you can't draw that information moving forward. It's critical. And don't be concerned if you haven't done this yet, because there is time to do it. There's time to get better at it. And there's time to revisit right now and go back to January or February, see where you were, what you did, how you could have improved, and then rebuild it into a lessons learned document that's going to save you at the back end. Your BIAs, your SOPs, and general policies are probably going to be modified based on structured lessons learned. But again, if you don't write them down, then they're going to be of no use. I don't know who's looked at plans such as from the SARS era or from MERS and looked in your organization to see, hey, what did we do? But probably, I'm just guessing, there's a lot of organizations that are going to have not a whole lot of information available that would have been really nice to have right now in this current environment. So can't stress this enough. Don't talk about this, or I can't talk about this enough, and imply that, you know, your organization really needs to be very responsive to lessons learned. Next slide. This is an addition to our webinar from yesterday. This is something that's been crafted by the Canadian military. Again, it's something that that you can utilize as a tool. Ensure that somebody's doing something, that they're looking at it, they're talking about it, and it's in some sort of document. It doesn't have to be this robust even. It can be on a piece of paper that you pass around in your EOC. But again, here's an example of something that has been done that you can utilize and look at after today. Next slide. So I've thrown some recommended readings in here, and the reason I did this is because there's not one of these books it gives you a roadmap to how to address a pandemic, but what they can do and what they will do is they'll provide you with some tangible examples of how organizations have had to kind of reinvigorate and regenerate themselves based on some impetus, whether it be a change in technology or something in the business realm that's caused them to move from point X to point Z. Again, it's important to look at what other people have done in the face of adversity and glean some examples from what they've done in an academic realm to use to sell uphill, if you will, to senior leadership to say, well, you know what, it may not have been a pandemic, but here's what this organization did in the face of this. And it's applicable here because we can do that, we can modify it, we can change some words, and we can be better because of it. So I really encourage you to look at these, especially reframing organizations, because that's essentially what everybody in the world is doing right now in the face of COVID-19. Next slide. So the operational planning process is a military context that is a framework that allows you to attack a problem. What Dave Whittier has done from your ally is he's taken that methodology and adjusted it to so that it's not militarized. And there's a series of videos that he's done which are exceptional. It's the process, it's the major steps. Again, I can't reinforce enough that it's about structure. It's about making sure that you are going in the right direction and that you have a framework that's going to support what you're doing and what your organization is doing. And so again, there's a YouTube channel that's a link there that you can take a look at these videos and think about some of the lessons that the military has learned from this OPP planning process and maybe utilize those as a best practice within your organization. Next slide. So highlights, again, there's a bunch of them. We've only got 30 minutes, but here's some of the things that you should be thinking about. I've talked a bunch about structure. Again, structure will save you. It's your friend. Plan for the unexpected. Again, we may be going in direction X and then we get some impetus that makes us change directions and go back to the beginning. Again, that's where the continuum model helps you out. In policing, we like to say if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Super important. Again, all these lessons we're learning on the go on a daily basis. So write them down, because if you don't, nobody else is going to be able to utilize them if something else 10 years from now happens and you didn't write it down or you didn't document it properly. Invest in multi-layered planning. Again, that's the importance of forward planning within the planning structure of an EOC. Very important to invest in that horsepower to get that done. Again, I know some organizations are struggling with horsepower as far as people goes, but if this is one that I would push up the chain of command and ensure that you've got support with. And when you're assessing and reassessing, always base it on evidence. If you don't, it's anecdote, it's rumor, it's innuendo. And I never like to use any of those terms when I'm putting together a constructive plan. I want to be evidence-based. I want things to support what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And that's the importance of forward future planning. And the one that I didn't write down that I should have is have a champion. Who is your voice for the rest of the organization? Who is it that's pushing this boulder up the hill on behalf of your team? Who's implying and imploring people to ensure that the structure remains and the EOC is so important and it's going to save you at the back end? Who is that voice? Who is that person? Who's that leader? It's very important that, you know, we may forget lessons that we've learned through our tabletop exercises or our full scale exercises. This is when you reinforce it. And this is when you really need to have the voice of reason in the room saying, okay, we practiced this, this worked, and if we're not doing it, we need to reattack it and do it the right way based on best principles and practices. Last slide. I always like to end with hope. Again, you know, I set the context of the battle, but this one is particularly compelling to me. First, it's by a leader, which I greatly respect, General Rick Hillier, but this is where we're at right now. This is our status quo. we're in trouble. The world is falling. Reputation is probably being shredded. Stress is definitely high. Friends are few. Bosses are angry. And failure could loom. But the focus that General Hillier said is you focus on the people. Again, you can't go far wrong, as he says, with focusing on the people, ensuring that they're okay, that they know what to do, that the communication links are there, that their mental health is being taken care of, and that they're pulling together as an organization to get us out of the COVID-19 era and to get us to a new normal and a new organizational structure and direction, and make sure that everybody's okay at the other end. Next slide. Any of this information, again, it's a lot to put into 30 minutes of a PowerPoint presentation, but Paul, John, Dave, and I are available. Our numbers, our contact information are there. We're here to help you. Again, this is an incredible time that we're in, and misery loves company, if you will, and you don't want to be alone when you're trying to plan things and you're trying to do the right job and trying to do the best that you can. Again, there's help, there's support out there, and we're always able to help if you need so. So last slide, I think. Yeah, that wraps up my my presentation in on time at 30 minutes. And yesterday there were some doozies questions wise, and I will try and do my best to answer everybody's question that they may have burning within them right now.
Great, thanks, Cam. Just a reminder to all of the participants, we won't be opening up the mics, but there are two ways. If you've got any questions or comments, you can either put them into the chat and I can look at them there, or you can use the question and answer icon on your toolbar to put a question in. We do have a couple of questions, and I'll just read this one here and hopefully prime the pump. I understand how and why we should be planning for the emergence of our companies into the post-COVID environment, but there is another potential problem looming. There has been much reported about the very strong possibility of a resurgence of this virus later this year towards the fall or winter. With that in mind, do you advise we plan for a possible second shut-in while planning for our pending startup? Would these plans be linked? Would they be handled separately by different teams? And what if we only have a very limited capability to plan anything?
Yeah, difficult question to answer. And again, if you don't have the people, then the person that has got the lead for planning is going to have their hands full, which they probably already do. But a couple of different points in there. If I were the master of the world and if I had infinite resources to do this, or two people, for instance, I would definitely be looking at two courses of action from a planning perspective. In that, first and foremost, is you've got your person that's planning for the current battle rhythm or the current command operational period. So that'll be a 12, 24, maybe 48 hours. So again, critical to what we're doing over the next couple of days. But I would have also somebody looking at 3, 6, 9 months down the road and looking to see what plans we can put in place to make sure that we've got everything together and planned for if there is a resurgence. And what those two teams or two people should be doing is having regular conversations inside of the planning realm, because something that I'm doing as a current period planner over the next 12, 24, 48 hours may impact what the person doing the 3, 6, 9 month period is doing quite substantially. So I would want to make sure that those folks are regularly communicating and ensuring that they've got the direction from the EOC director to understand what the organization wants when you're talking now into the policy group era or the policy group area of what that direction coming down. and that's going to formulate your objectives, your strategies, and your tactics, which again is EOC essentials. But again, without closing that loop with all of those different folks, there may be a disconnect at some point in time. But there, by all information that I've heard and that you've probably heard, there will be a resurgence of some sort, and we need to plan for that. But again, I want to emphasize, base it on evidence. Don't base it on innuendo. Again, you can do some planning based on what you think might happen. But again, at the end of the day, you might have to resort back to, okay, what will happen and what do we currently know and how do we deal with that based on the best information coming in. So again, I feel for organizations that don't have the folks that are able to be assigned to this critical planning role, and you'll have to do the best you can with the people that you have.
Thanks, Cam, and that makes really good sense, and that falls in line with some thoughts that I've been having recently on the same sort of issue. I mean, the way I look at it, you've got a number of sort of thought focal points or thought bubbles that you need to give some time to, and it could be, you know, 3 people giving undivided attention to each one of these thought focal points, being current ops / crisis management, and then short-term planning, and then long-term planning. Or it could be an individual splitting their time up between focusing on those different areas. And I think it's really important that you touched upon the communication part, where, you know, the EOC director needs to communicate with these planners. The person that's doing current ops needs to communicate with the person doing the plan so they understand what the environment looks like that they're doing the planning in. And it's also really important to have some kind of standard procedure so that people understand when a plan stops being in the realm of the long-term planner and gets handed over into the short-term planner, and conversely, when a plan stops being in the realm of the short-term planner and ends up in the lap of the current ops person. You know, there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do it, but everybody has to understand how that process is supposed to run.
Couldn't agree more, Dave.
Another question here, and it's related. It's just, how do we navigate medium or long-term planning with so much uncertainty about the post-COVID era?
Well, I mean, you have enough information right now. You know what your organizational structure looks like. You know what people are talking about and what the best plans of the day currently are. I think there's enough information right now that you can really focus on some certain areas, but have some intangibles, and that's where I think the use of the courses of action or the COAs is really important, because you can build that right into your COAs. Again, that doesn't have to be your strategies or your objective strategies and tactics can change with regularity, but you also have to have people that are creative in their planning thought process to ensure that, okay, well, let's think outside of the box, and if it does really go over here, which it's not supposed to, but let's talk about that anyways. At least you've got a plan in place, which somebody will be really happy afterwards if you had come up with that and it was bang on with what actually really happened. So again, you should base things on evidence, but if you don't have the evidence to support something, that doesn't mean you can't focus outside of the context that you currently have and come up with some creative ideas on how to get back to the new normal.
No, it makes sense. Great. Thanks, Cam. Another question here. How do we reinforce a culture of human concern for the mental and physical well-being of the entire company? So I guess that's sort of speaking to our responsibility as leaders in how we engage in managing and leading and taking care of our people.
Yeah, it's a valuable point. It's something that I reinforce when I teach all of my courses related to incident command, and I actually, wrote my master's thesis on this. And the bottom line is that it's everyone's responsibility. Although some people may have a higher level of responsibility as for the daily, weekly, monthly check-ins with the team that they're leading, that doesn't preclude somebody that's involved in a minor capacity outside of the realm of the EOC even of indicating that people are concerned, people are stressed, people are having an adverse reaction to the current context. Again, and as a leader, as the person running the EOC, I may not even see that, but I really want to know about it. But conversely, as a leader of the EOC or as a leader of the planning section or any of the other tangents related to the structure, I may be the worst person that is not taking that medicine into my mindset and thinking that I'm irreplaceable and that I need to stay there longer than I actually should stay there, having an adverse reaction to myself. And I may not see that. So it's important. I would say it's critical for everybody to understand that and to ensure that you have that conversation with regularity to make sure everybody's okay. And when this is all said and done, you have a great big critical incident stress debriefing session with all the people that are related. You may have to do smaller ones and then have one big one, but you need to have that in your strategy. That's probably part of your lessons learned right now that I would be writing down and putting bold stars beside, et cetera, to ensure that that we're all good and we're ready for the next one.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna pile onto this one because I've got some thoughts, oddly enough. Eh? I spent a little bit of time in the military, and we did study leadership at length. But the guy that really blew my mind in the whole realm of leadership was a gentleman by the name of David Rock, and he wrote a couple of books, including Quiet Leadership and Your Brain at Work. And he talks about human beings as being social animals. We evolved to live and fight and feed in groups of maybe about 20 people. And a lot of our interpersonal relationships now are still guided by some of that genetic residue from our interactions, 80,000 years ago. And he talks about leadership in terms of fulfilling people's social needs. And there's a list of them, but the three that really jump out in my mind right now are certainty, where no one knows what's going on and no one knows what's going to happen. And I think it's really important for us as leaders to do what we can to try and fulfill our people's needs for certainty. And you mentioned the communication part. I mean, the lines of communication have to be open at all times and explaining what it is that we know and where we're going, and try to articulate a vision for people to work towards. I think that's really important. The other one that we're struggling with now is the need for relatedness, which we had almost as a default just by going into the office. And a lot of people are stuck at home in a new environment. They're working on. Are we still there?
Yep, you disappeared for a moment there, Dave.
Okay. I'm just going to go back to the. Nope. So the need for relatedness, and how do we maintain that need now, or meet that need in a world where we're not always in the same space. And the last one is the need for fairness. I mean, some people, we might be in a position in the future soon where some people have to work in the office, some people have to work from home, or some people get to work from the office, and some people get to work from home. And how do we manage that in the context of fairness? Another question came up here. In regards to re-entry to post-secondary, we need to look at planning for this. Do you have a guiding principle?
Wow, I know who asked that question. Yeah, I've been thinking about that one a lot, and that is going to be particularly challenging. But if I were again king of the world and looking at this from a holistic standpoint and planning, I would the reintegration of people into large clusters like that is going to have to be what I referred to in the one slide as kind of the slow roll. In that, we've got some very good principles that have been ingrained in people over the past 2 to 3 months. So now is the time to utilize those same principles in forwarding your reintegration into any school situation or post-secondary education sector. Again, the one that I think of when I was thinking about this is the lanes, about where people walk. Directionally, you see it in the grocery stores, you see it in trails, you see it in other areas. As I would be thinking about things such as that, and then be very careful with how we do the reintegration piece. And again, if you're able to use the fallback positions of what you're able to do right now and how you're able to maybe keep people away until we're past the cusp, then again, those thoughts and processes should be in play. But there should be a lot of discussion between the leadership of the university and the emergency operations center team about, okay, how are we going to do this? But then once we do it, the other thing that pauses me, some thought is who is going to be kind of enforcing those new principles and those new guidelines of how we're doing things. Because again, people are used to this structure, and you want to make sure you ensure that remains in place. Following the go live once again prospect when we're getting into the latter parts of the year or even into next year. Again, capture those good principles right now. Ensure that there's support for doing things in that kind of way, that method of doing it, and then pulling the trigger on it, and having a plan that if that doesn't work in the first onset, or we need to do something radical, then we pull back very quickly. Again, that speaks to also the COAs. What are your courses of action? How are you going to do this? It can't be the status quo in those environments. So again, what are our 3 planning tangents that we're going to implore with the people, with the staff, with the students? How are we going to communicate that? There's so much work to do that it's people are going to have their hands full, but we want to make sure that we do it with great consideration, with some tentativeness, but be ready to pull the trigger and maneuver back to where we are right now in case we have to. But again, that could be 4 hours worth of discussion just on that one alone. But I hope that helps out with a little bit of an answer for the folks in higher ed.
Thanks, Cam. So we've got a couple of minutes until the top of the hour, but the questions seem to have ended. I will just I'll give the audience another minute. If there are any other questions or thoughts, you can just put them up on the chat or the Q&A. Oh, here's one. In your experiences, do you find that people comply more willingly with implied orders or actual enforceable orders regulations?
That's a difficult question to answer. Again, it depends. What is historically have you done in times of chaos? You don't want to rely on implied orders and ensure that, or assume that people are going to respond accordingly. You need, in some instances, especially when you've got a high stress level situation, you need very direct orders. And this is why the policing realms and the backgrounds of the military folks work really well. But you're going to need probably a mixture of those. The biggest thing that is going to save you is direct and transparent communication and very insightful, thoughtful, and direct leadership on why we're doing things, because that's going to be the biggest question, especially when you're dealing with generational membership and different people with different experiences and different thoughts on being oppressed, if you will, by institutions. You want to make sure that people are very well educated on why we're doing things, and then you also give them on the other end of the spectrum, you give them the consequences that this is what's going to happen if we don't. Again, that's where if you have a solid plan in place, you have a good fallback position, you can revert to that and ensure that you can pull the trigger on some of the more again direct directions, if you will, on what they should do and how they should do it. So again, that's going to be up to your leaders of your teams. The EOC leader, the policy group is going to be particularly valuable in this realm, and you take your direction from there, and you're the ones that execute that direction. So again, this is a good opportunity to utilize the courses of action. Okay, what's our 3 options? If people are not compliant with what we're suggesting that they do, here's option 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to do one of the 3 of those or a combination thereof of the 3.
Makes good sense, Cam, and I think that why is really, really important. I mean, if you give somebody a rule and say, follow this rule, people are going to be inclined to start trying to find loopholes if all they've got is the rule to deal with. But if you can give them a why and make people understand the intent and the end state that's you're looking at when you put the rule out, then at least they can focus on that intent and that end state. And then even if they don't follow the rule to the letter, they're still getting the organization the way that you need to get. And that's especially important in an environment like this, where the situation is changing all the time. And you may issue an order, and then a week later, it's no longer relevant because the situation has changed. But if you can articulate the end state and make people understand where you're going and why you're trying to get there, nobody wakes up in the morning hoping to fail, and people are going to want to succeed. And if they understand that context, you're more likely to get to a successful conclusion.
Yeah, and just to end that point, and I think it's a good jump off time here to bring John back in, but it also reinforces the structure. I look back at the question regarding guiding principles. Well, the guiding principles are the Emergency Operations Center activity, their direction, their planning, all of the focus on what the people are doing to support what it is that they're supporting. And in this case, it's obviously the coronavirus. But if you re-emphasize that structure and you fall back on that structure, it's going to give you the answers. It's going to give you your guiding principles on how to do things in a scalable manner and ensure success.
Great, thanks, Cam. Okay, John, over to you.
All right, thanks, Dave. So we're now into the closing phase of today's webinar. I just want to say a big thank you to Cam. That was very informative and very broad in the presentation in a very condensed time frame. So thank you very much for that. To the participants, we will be following up with emails to each of you with link information to the video. As I alluded to earlier, we did record this session, so you will be able to go back and review it and review some of the questions and answers if you didn't record them or write them down as they're being presented. The emails will also contain links to the various reference materials that were mentioned during the PowerPoint presentation. There's also going to be a short survey, and the purpose of this survey will enable us to tailor the next few webinars really to your needs. So it will be based purely on your feedback as well as those from yesterday. Again, I want to thank everyone who attended today for your time, and we hope to see you virtually at our next session. And that concludes today's webinar, Planning for the Post-COVID Era. Thank you all very much.